all set here. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about children and family gaming for a few minutes. And obviously, if anybody has questions, feel free to put up a hand or stop me as I'm going along. I wanted to give everybody a little bit of background just because the focus generally of events like this is often where all the big dollars are in the industry, so mid-core and hardcore gaming and so-called core gaming. But I guess I'm waving the flag for both branded and particularly children's gaming because I think it represents a very interesting segment of our industry that is growing very, very quickly. So without further ado, just very quick background on us. Who are we? We're a Hong Kong-based developer and publisher. We've been around since the beginning of mobile gaming. We focus specifically on creating games based on licensed intellectual property. So we create original games based on brands and characters that we license. So for example, we work with a lot of the best known characters from animation and film and TV, etc. And we feature those characters in our original games. So I think actually in our business, we have probably the largest portfolio of brands if you look at the number of brands. So that's always been a big focus for us, and obviously we put it in the name of the company, so brands is our focus. To talk a little bit about the market size for kids, there's been an interesting shift in usage of devices amongst kids. So I'd like to specifically take a look at the UK market. This was in The Guardian recently, and if you look at kids between the ages of 5 and 15, you'll notice here that as of 2014, a third of kids between 5 and 15 now have their own tablet devices. And for those of you with small children, you will be very, very sensitive to this. And historically, those tablet devices were devices that belong to the parents. These are first and second generation iPads, for example, and then they're handed down to the kids. Okay, have your first kid, they turn 3 or 4, and you give them your old tablet, you go get a new one, right? And one of the things we can see is we can actually see from device activations in new games a big presence of tablet devices that are older. So 2, 3, 4-year-old devices going into new titles. And those we can assume very effectively are younger children. So if we look at, for example, under 5s, this is again a new trend. So 31% children under 5 own a tablet, right? And 25% of children under 3. So device usage is getting younger and younger and younger, okay? And we can debate all day long whether this is good or bad for kids, and that's the subject of another presentation, I'm sure. But the reality is that tablets and tablet usage are becoming a part of childhood, and they're becoming a part of the entertainment diet of all kids. And so the question is, as an industry, how do we address that through gaming? And we can look at the various things that kids do, and both with their tablets and also just in their general entertainment diet. So here's a little bit of a look at a survey of ASEAN, which is Southeast Asia, and kids, what kids are doing amongst their entertainment choices. So fortunately for all of us, mobile gaming is actually number 3. So 70% of kids surveyed rank mobile gaming, amongst one of their key entertainment opportunities, after TV and books. And considering the age of our industry and the age of the book industry, I think we're doing okay with only 1 percentage point differential. So I think this is interesting. This is again an opportunity to say that amongst their entertainment diet and all the activities that children are pursuing, mobile games are a huge part of it. So, sorry, my clicker is just catching up, it seems. When we think about monetization, okay, the children's app store, or the kids category within the app store, I should say, can tell us a lot because, we as traditional adult game publishers or publishers focusing on the adult market, we've been focused on freemium for a long time now. It feels like forever, 3 or 4 years where pretty much all the product we put out is freemium because that's been the most successful way to monetize game content. But when you look at the kids category, the kids category has a very diverse array of different kinds of business models. And there was a lot of freemium in the kids category. And then that resulted in actually a lot of backlash amongst parents and particular media coverage of that backlash. And it's sometimes difficult to know whether the media coverage was bigger or the backlash was bigger. But freemium is now very much out of fashion when it comes to children because parents are concerned about what it is their kids are consuming, whether there are restrictions and controls on what they can consume, and most importantly, all of the horror stories people have heard of kids getting a hold of the parent's device and the password for their iTunes account, and then all of a sudden they get a bill for $5,000 at the end of the month. So what we see is basically a bifurcation in the market between free apps and paid apps, so free and premium. And on the free side, if we look between the ages of 9 and 11, in the top grossing charts, only 10% are free apps, okay, or freemium apps. And for 5 to 11-year-olds, about half of the top grossing have some kind of IAP, although the majority of those tend to be subscription services or pay to unlock type of services as opposed to consumables. So consumables are definitely out of fashion when it comes to children's content. When we look at the paid or the premium side of the equation, then the average price point where it's a higher price, say $2.99, we find that only 3% of those games had any IAP available to them, and at lower price points, still, even only 16-17% of the games had IAP available to them. So the majority of content still is either pay to unlock or subscription services. And if we look at this is the top grossing chart of the kids category of the US iTunes store a few days ago, and we look at what kind of business models are represented on that top grossing chart. First, let's look at the paid games. So these are all the paid titles, and that's roughly a third of the top grossing chart. And then if we add on top of the paid titles the subscription services, you get another third. Okay, so between paid and subscription, there's already the majority of the top grossing chart. And that I think is very interesting because if you compare that to the top grossing chart in any other category, you're just going to see freemium everywhere. Freemium, freemium, freemium. And then when you add on top, these are the ones that have some IAP available in them. You'll find one lone guy left here from Nickelodeon who is actually paid with IAP. But otherwise, everything basically is either premium or subscription services. So, moving along, one thing that you probably noticed in that previous slide are brands, okay? And in children's gaming, even more so than in adult-oriented gaming, brands are very important because brands speak both to kids through the characters that they know and love and enjoy playing with and identify with. And brands also speak to the parents because brands speak to the parents about a kind of quality and trust and environment for their children that they feel comfortable. So there's a lot of focus amongst large entertainment companies that pursue children's gaming as in addition to other content that they produce, to continue to reinforce and leverage that brand that they have and that trust that they have with kids. So here are two obvious examples, Disney and Viacom or Nickelodeon. And these are big kids brands in all types of media platforms. And so we see they're also represented very strongly amongst mobile gamers in the top grossing charts of the App Store because both Disney and Nickelodeon have a very strong presence amongst apps that are both successful in terms of engagement and successful from a revenue standpoint in the kids category in gaming. So, moving on, talking about people who are mobile first and creating brands just on mobile, but focused on children's audiences. Obviously, within our own industry, we've seen huge success from a lot of major players with regards to content that's geared towards kids. And I know obviously Rovio is not specifically geared towards kids, but I'll point to the fact that they did $200 million worth of licensing business, and that's primarily plush toys and pencil cases and backpacks and things that are geared towards kids. So forgetting about the rest of Angry Birds, $200 million on licensing towards kids is not a bad business, okay? So you look that there's been tremendous success in, financially speaking, marketing and targeting games towards kids, as long as you do it in a manner that's both attractive to kids and respective of what parents are interested in for their kids. So if we think about branding and we go back to that chart of the top grossing kids category on iTunes, let's take a look at that chart now through the lens not of business models but of brands. So if I look at Disney, right? Where's Disney? So Disney is there with 3, 6, 7 titles, and then I add on top of that Nickelodeon, which is Viacom. Okay, so already that's roughly half of my top grossing chart between two strong forces in children-related brands. And then I add on top of that other offline children or non-gaming children's brands. So Barbie from Mattel or Hava, which is children's toys, Hooked on Phonics, etc. Okay, so those are offline brands that are familiar with kids that have made it online. And then lastly, if I add on mobile-first brands specifically targeting kids, right? So these are people who are just trying to build franchises of kid-related content, like Tokaboka, obviously, which is probably one of the best-known mobile-first kids brands. So that's the majority of the top-grossing chart. So clearly, everybody here has a very strong focus towards building that brand engagement with the children's audience and with the parents' audience. Okay. So obviously, branding is key. One of the reasons, and this is a presentation I've given many times over the past several years with regards to gaming for adults, branding is very important because clearly it's a user acquisition tool, right? People are receptive to brands, they go into the App Store, brands result in a lot of organic installs, something we've seen in some of the earlier presentations as well, for sure. But, as I said, they're a sign of trust for parents, so that's important. But working with brands is also very challenging, and there's a lot of restrictions in working with brands. And again, when you embark on a project with a partner who has final say over all of the artwork and all of the storyboards and everything, then you have to make sure to treat it as a partnership. It's not just being able to make anything you like. So working with brands has its challenges. Now, if we think about it as a discovery tool and we look at the App Store, just take for a minute a look at how brands are treated within the iTunes App Store. You'll notice in the kids category, you see brands represented in two different ways. You see it on top here, which these are the brands that resonate with children. So the characters, Elmo, Sesame Street, Care Bears. And down here, you actually see brands that resonate with the parents. So these are actually corporate brands, which is kind of an interesting thing that they're given, albeit lower ranking, but this is where parents are clicking in because they think Cartoon Network, good for my kids, Tokaboka, good for my kids, right? So there's something here that appeals to both demographics because ultimately, when you're merchandising in the App Store, you're trying to appeal both to parents and kids because you don't know who's going to be making that click to install. Some parents load up the tablets and give them to the kids. Others respond to requests from kids who are going and searching for things in the App Store on their own. And if you look at Google's approach, Google came out last year with Design for Families. And Design for Families is specifically merchandised around the idea that brands attract kids, and so they've made collections of apps and games featuring particular brands. Because when kids go in there, and you'll see this with YouTube for Kids, for example, huge amount of algorithmic voice search for brands. Kids speak into the tablet on YouTube and say, Elmo, and they get all the Elmo videos, right? And so the same thing in Google's Design for Families. So last thing, this one's for you. John wrote a piece last week which resonated with me because I'm in the branding business, and also because we do female RPGs. But this is one of the perils of working with brands. We can all talk about the success stories of working with brands, but I also mentioned there are challenges. So you need to think carefully about how you use the brand, about how that brand engages with consumers, because simply having a brand that has an existing audience, an existing fan base, is not a guarantee of success by any measure. So this is just, I don't know that this is necessarily a cautionary tale, but it's more just an illustration that success is not easy regardless of whether you employ a brand or not. It's just our belief that it's actually, working with brands is a more sure path to success. So that's something we do. I'll leave you with one last slide, and then I'll wrap it up here. This is something which is probably the most important slide of the presentation and the most boring. So this is COPPA, and I'm sure some of you are aware of COPPA. It's the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act in the US. And COPPA is extremely important when it comes to kids. So basically what COPPA says is that you're not allowed to collect and store and keep data if you know that it comes from children. And simple age gating on apps does not qualify as screening for children because everybody knows children lie. So you have to be very careful and respectful of how you treat that data. And so COPPA compliancy is a very, very important factor in operating within the environment of selling things to children and to parents. And in fact, the EU now will have shortly even stricter guidelines. So for COPPA, the guidelines are for children up to the age of 13, and the EU is extending that to age 16 with a specific focus on social media. So this will have a very large impact on anybody who has player bases under the age of 16, because you're going to have to think extremely importantly about the kind of data that you collect. Data must be expunged after 30 days. Are you handing any data to third parties? So for example, that advertising SDK you have, take it out, no advertising, because every advertising SDK on the market hands data over to somebody else, and you're not allowed to do that. You can keep it for yourself as the developer, but you cannot give it to an ad network for retargeting. So retargeting as a technique is off the table, for example. So a lot of things about how we do gaming and how we do engagement and analyzing player behavior will have to change by nature of the regulation around children's gaming specifically. So thank you very much. If anybody has any questions, please let me know.
Thank you very much indeed.